I'm Billy Williams. This is the ThermaCor 1200 Rapid Thermal Infusion System. It is designed to flow from 10 mLs an hour to 1200 mLs a minute, targeting 40 degrees centigrade at all flow rates. When you're ready to use the unit, you should always start by making sure that it's plugged into an outlet, preferably an isolated outlet. And secondly, you want to go ahead and turn the unit on. And the reason you do that is you always want to be sure, because of the situation you'll be using this in, that everything is working properly before you spend all the time setting it up. It should go through a self-diagnostic and come up with a message saying no cassette. The next thing you want to do is remove the component guard. The component guard is designed to prevent damage to the sensors, the pads, and everything else that the ThermaCor uses to get the measurements. So to remove the component guard, you take the 3-position latch, and right now it's in the lock position. This is the load position. You can see we have a little play now. And if you go all the way forward, that is the unlock position, and you can remove the component guard. This kit has everything you will need for a single patient in here. It'll have your cassette, your patient line, and your triple spike line. It is all sterile packed, and the first thing you'll find on top is your cassette. The cassette has obviously a clamshell around it to prevent damage during shipment. And one of the first things you'll notice about the cassette are these nice brightly colored connectors. We have color-coded connectors to make it very simple to set up the additional disposables, even if you've never seen the unit before. The tubing on the side is your roller pump tubing. We'll discuss that in more detail in a second. And on the bottom is your hinge point. And that's the area we're going to focus on right now, because this is the area you're going to use to attach it to the ThermaCor, using this hinge point and this one here. These actually apply to the bars you see here on the front of the ThermaCor. So to get the ThermaCor ready to accept the cassette, you have to do two things. First, put your latch into the load position, and then secondly, open the roller pump door. Now, to load the cassette, it should be a single hand operation. Anytime I see people try to use two hands, they make it much more difficult than it is. You simply grab the cassette, rest that bottom hinge on the bottom bar, press forward until you see this top bar drop down, and you can see now you're locked on, and then you pull the latch into the lock position. And what you've just done is align 4 air sensors, 4 temperature sensors, and 3 pressure sensors. Now lastly, we need to put the roller pump tubing in. The roller pump tubing, as I said, is the part that is, it is a soft tubing, and you want to be sure that you put it completely into the roller pump. So when you're doing that, the best way is just simply to pinch it, let it ride your finger in, and then take 2 fingers and press the top and bottom all the way against the back wall inside of the roller pump opening. And when you're done, when you shut the door, you can hear it will actually center the tubing for you. So now you're ready to attach the remaining disposables. This is what the cassette kit looks like when you remove the cassette. Inside, you'll see you have a quick reference guide to cover everything we just discussed. And below that is where the remaining disposables are. And on top of having the remaining disposables, there's also another quick reference guide for you on how to attach those. So we're going to start with our triple spike line, which you snap into the triple spike holder. Move your triple spikes out of the way. And you can see the blue to blue and yellow to yellow. So all you have to do is connect appropriately. So I'm going to start with the yellow, because the yellow uses a lure connector. So what you do is you go ahead and remove the small caps and the small one on this one as well, and you should be left with that yellow connector. Now when you're applying, don't twist the tube, because you don't want to twist that there. What you want to do is use the yellow connector to tighten it on. Next, you're going to remove the blue caps, and you'll see that not only are the caps color-coded, the connectors are color-coded, and they're gender-coded. So this one is a male, this is the same kind of connector, but this one's a female. So you simply press those together. And then you can adjust your height to make sure that they have no kinks in the tubing here. Now let's attach our patient line. The patient line, as you can see as well, has a red connector, so it's very obvious where it goes. Remove your red caps, and you simply press this connector. You can see the white to white and the female versus the male. Press them together and leave the other end, this cap, on. That way, if by chance you drop this during setup, all you have to do is wipe down the outside of the tubing. If you were to remove this, you would need to replace that. Next, let's go ahead and spike our bag so we're ready to prime. And I have pre-used these, so I have to remove the spikes that I've used prior to that. And you simply spike your bag. Make sure all your clamps are closed prior to spiking your bag. All right, so now let me go through verbally what we're going to see on the priming phase. What you'll end up doing is opening a clamp, allowing your chamber here to fill to a 2/3 point. And at that point, you'll see on the front you have a flashing prime button light. So you press prime once it's reached 2/3 and the unit will prime the cassette. Once it's finished with the cassette, it's going to say prime patient line. So at that point, you look up here at your reservoir again and make sure that it has at least 2/3 fluid. And if it does, you once again press the flashing prime button. And then it's going to prime your patient line. And at that point, what you'll do is make sure that you remove that last cap, have your clamp in your hand, and once the last air bubble is through the line, you'll clamp it off. So let's get started. So you can see we've opened our clamp, filled to 2/3. And then we're going to press our prime button. The air you see coming into the chamber is actually the air being purged from the cassette. While that's priming, go ahead and remove the cap from your patient line. Make sure you have a trash can or a sink nearby and have the clamp in hand. Now you can see it's finished the cassette prime and it says prime patient line on the front screen. You look up to be sure that you have at least 2/3 volume in your filter housing. And when you do, you simply press the flashing prime light again. And now I'm watching this tube to get that last air bubble out. And now we have completed the prime. Now if you look on screen, it tells you continue prime or press start. The only reason you would continue prime is if you felt you still had air in the line. If you don't, you're ready to attach it to your patient. Since I don't have a patient here, I bring my own. So we're going to attach to this 3-liter bag so you can actually see the fluid that's coming from the ThermaCor. So at this point you can see continue prime or start. We know the prime is fine, so we simply press start. And now you can see on your numeric display the selected window on the bottom says 120 and the actual window on the top says 120. Now those two may differ sometimes, and we'll cover that in more detail in just a minute. So the first question you need to ask yourself is how do you know whether you're in a per hour or per minute mode? And the way you know that is there's 3 visual indicators. You have one to the immediate right of the numeric display, to the immediate left over here with the rapid and slow buttons, and you also have one at the top left corner which says slow. That will say either slow, bolus, or rapid. So those are your 3 indicators. Now, if I want to adjust this flow rate, you simply use the up and down arrows to the right side of the numeric display, and you can press and hold it and it will scroll the values, or you can go in increments of 10. And also, whenever you're adjusting, always make sure you're looking at the lower selected window. That way you'll get a real-time response. If you look at your actual window, it's always going to lag behind a bit. I'm going to adjust it to 400. And so now we're running at 400 mLs an hour. So let's assume we have it on a patient and the patient has lost some blood, and you look at your suction canister and you have 250 ml of blood in there. So we want to replace that volume. The beauty of the ThermaCor is you don't have to go to rapid mode. We've built 4 separate bolus buttons into the front panel. You have 100, 250, 500, or 1,000 mLs. So we're going to give a 250 bolus, and you can see it's going to give a volume of 250 at a flow rate of 500 mLs a minute. You can adjust this flow rate from 20 to 1,200 mLs. So if I'm ready to go, I simply press start, and you can see that our selected and our actual are beginning to align. And so now we are giving the appropriate amount, flow rate. And if you look over here, you can see our volume is starting to be pumped into the patient. Now if you look on screen, you can see how much time is left for that bolus to be delivered, how much volume is left to be delivered. You also have the total volume delivered to the patient, as well as the temperature and the pressure in the patient line. Now this is the safest way to deliver volume to your patient because boluses are press and forget. You can press and start a bolus and go back to working with the patient if you like, because once it delivers the bolus, it goes back to where you had it set before, which in this case was 400 mLs an hour. So boluses are very nice. And if you're dealing with pediatric patients, you don't have to keep the default 500 mLs a minute, as I mentioned earlier. So if I had a pediatric patient and felt 500 mLs a minute was too rapid, I can simply adjust this down. And then at that point, if I press start, from that point forward, any bolus I deliver will be using the adjusted flow rate. So you only have to adjust the bolus one time, the flow rate on the bolus, and from that point forward they will all deliver at the adjusted flow rate. Now sometimes though you have a patient like in liver transplants and some level 1 traumas where they're bleeding so badly you can't keep up with just boluses. So when that occurs, you do need to go to the rapid mode. Rapid mode, as you see, will default to 500 mLs a minute, and this is also adjustable from 20 to 1200. And if you're comfortable with the flow rate, you simply press start, and the ThermaCor will go up to 500 where you've set it. And right now it is draining this bag, and I'm doing this on purpose so I can show you afterwards how to recover from fluid out situations. And the rapid mode, you should be careful with that as well, because the two ways rapid will stop are you stop it or you run out of fluid. So you need to be careful that you stay focused on the ThermaCor when you're using the rapid mode, and make sure you're communicating the types of volumes that you're delivering to the patient. So you can see now that our IV fluid has emptied, and now our reservoir is going to start to empty. And when it's done, we're going to get an alarm telling us exactly what to do to recover from being out of fluid. So once this finishes, you'll see this tube empty, and we're going to get a message over here that says add fluid, prime, and start. Right here, add fluid, prime, and start. So to recover, you simply close your empty bag and spike your new bag. If you haven't already had one spiked. And you open that one. You allow your chamber to fill to 2/3 again, but this time all you have to prime is the line with the blue clamp on it. So you allow this to fill to 2/3, you press the flashing prime button and get the air out of this line, and you're done. So now the next question would be, where did that air go? The air, we have a patented air removal system for high flow rates. So if you'll watch right here, I'm going to put it back in rapid mode, and you'll see that the air will collect here, and we monitor this, and it'll purge the air by itself. So no more burping bags or anything along those lines. The ThermaCor handles all the air for you. Next, we have the maximum pressure. You have two options on the maximum pressure. You have 300 millimeters of mercury and 100 millimeters of mercury. The default is 300. That's used for the adults and larger pediatric patients. 100 is typically used for pediatric or geriatric patients. So the easiest way to see the difference in these two and how they respond is, let me just show you. I'm going to leave it in the 300 millimeter mercury mode, and I'm going to put it in rapid mode, and watch how quickly this gets up to 500 mLs per minute. I'll get it all out. We're already there. So now when I put it in the 100, now watch how quickly it gets there. You can see it's a much slower increase in that flow rate. So if you're working with peds or if you're working with geriatric patients, it's much easier on the patient and the catheter side. Now, the other thing that this is good for is this automatically adjusts your pressure and your flow rate to prevent overpressurizing the catheter site or the patient. And the reason this is here as well is because we found that in some of the other older technologies, they were increasing the pressure on the patient bags, or the IV bags, and ending up creating too much pressure and actually lysing the blood. So you're giving the volume you want, but you're actually not doing the patient any favors because the blood has been too damaged on the delivery. So this allows you to attach to any size catheter, and it will automatically adjust to help prevent damaging the blood or the catheter site. And the other major benefit is it can go on any size catheter. So if you have an IO or a 20 or an 18, you can connect, and it will give as much as possible without damaging the blood or that catheter site. So let me give you for instance so you can kind of get a feel for this. If you had an 18 gauge catheter in and you decided you wanted to run 500 mLs a minute, what you would see on screen and the select it will say 500. But when you start to flow, this actual up here is going to say approximately 200, because that's about as much as an 18 gauge catheter is going to allow you to flow without overpressurizing it. So it'll reach that 300 millimeter mercury pressure cap and then start reducing the flow rate. And that is why you have two separate numbers here. You can see that the actual is different than your selected. And whenever that occurs, that means you have back pressure in your patient line somewhere between where it comes out of the cassette and where it connects to your patient. and 9 times out of 10 it's your catheter size. But there are other things that can cause that. For instance, one of the second most common things I see is this product. This is called a clave, and you cannot use claves really with any rapid infuser. Maximum flows, if you have one of these in, are going to be around 60 to 80 ml a minute. So you definitely need to remove that from the system. And I would recommend anything that you have between the catheter and the patient line should be removed, because most likely it will restrict flow for you. The next button across the top is your heat control. Heat is always on unless you've turned it off or unless you're on battery. On battery, the only thing you lose is heat. Everything else works just like it does when it's plugged into the wall. So if you want to disable your heat while it's plugged in, you simply press and hold it, and you can turn it back on the same way. Battery life is going to be between 30 minutes and 4 to 5 hours, depending on the flow rate that you've chosen. Mute key is just like everything else on the market. If you have an alarm, you want to silence it, you press mute. It'll give you about 2 minutes of audio silence before reactivating. And lastly is your recirculation button in the bottom. The reason I've saved that for last is because it does not apply to this particular setup. This is your triple spike. That is designed for use of a 2.5 liter reservoir. And the reason that's there is sometimes when you're using a reservoir, you might have a liter or half a liter left in the reservoir, and you can't just let it sit because it can coagulate. So what they will do is they'll use the recirculation button to move the blood down through the cassette and then back into the reservoir. So it does 3 things. It keeps the blood moving to help prevent coagulation. It pre-warms it by going through the cassette. And lastly, when it goes back into the reservoir, it actually will run through the filtration so that if any clotting had occurred, it'll pull those out of your blood supply. So when you use the recirculation, it'll run for approximately 5 minutes, and then when it's done, it'll ask you what you'd like to do next. The last 2 things on the bottom, you have a IV pole clamp, which basically is right here. You can see, and you just need to tighten it as much as you can so that it won't slide down the pole. And lastly, this is a foot switch port. This was designed with the thought of warm irrigation during open abdominal procedures or urinary procedures. And what it will do is allow you to adjust your flow rate to a comfortable level for irrigation, and you always get the 40°C temperature in the flow rate, and you can stop and start it with the foot switch. Now the disposables are good for once you start using them. Once they get wet, they're good for 24 hours of continuous use or 99 liters of fluid. The last thing I want to share with you is you should not ever, and this goes actually for all rapid infusers, use platelets or cryo with your rapid infusion system. And of course, this is a blood pump, so you should not be using medications in there as well. Now we're going to demonstrate installing the large volume reservoir. The large volume reservoir gives you 2.5 liters of buffer fluid availability here, plus 5 spike lines, so you can spike 5 different bags at the same time. When you're ready to install, there are grooves in the mount as well as a ridge around the top of the reservoir. When you're ready to install, usually have the tubes towards the back of the pump. So when you press it in, it'll lock in place. That snap ensures you that it is locked in place. Next, take your 5 spike lines, move them out of the way while you attach the remaining disposables. First, start with your yellow. You have a stop cock on the yellow line that is always pre-positioned, and all you need to do is remove the yellow cap here, press these together, and tighten them up. Next, you're just like before, you use the blue to blue, pull these 2 caps, press them together, and now you're ready to go. If you want to spike, you can take our bag down, and spike your bag. When you're ready to prime, you want to have at least a 300 milliliter fluid volume available for priming. So when you open your spike, and when you first open it, most of it's going to be absorbed by the filtration in the back, and then you'll see it start filling up. Usually I will leave this clamp open. Some people like to have it closed. I prefer it open. It's just one less step you have to work with. So you just watch here until you get to around 300, and then you're going to press the flashing prime light on the front. Once you have your 300 mLs, you press the prime button, and a cassette prime will begin. The next phase after the cassette prime would be your patient line prime. So you can see it says prime patient line. Make sure you have approximately 300 in here. Press your prime flashing light. And so here's where you're and now you're ready to attach to your patient. And that concludes the in-service. I'm Billy Williams. This is the ThermaCor 1200 Rapid Thermal Infusion System.